Welcome to Rooted Last Emerging Conversations, a series of discussions where we share our learnings and emerging thoughts on our work. I'm Marcus Owens, and I'm joined by two remarkable leaders, Bota Rabe and Tracy Fishman. Together, we have been on a journey to activate more sustainable ways of investing in the success of Minnesota's Black, Indigenous, Asian, and Latinx Latina communities through research, community engagement, and community-centered design. Through these discussions, we will share inspiring stories, innovative strategies, and actionable insights to build enduring community impact. So get ready for thought-provoking conversation. And I'd like to invite in my friends and colleagues, Tracy and Bo.
As we've gathered a lot of these inputs from our core audience and from our wisdom circle, we started to see a framework start to emerge. And it's still developing and we're still working on it, but we thought it would be important to bring it to our audience to share, kind of where our thinking is today. And as we dive into this framework, I'm going to give you some definitions and then we'll go into some dialogue. So the framework has really two sides. The first side, we call it, is flow, absorb, and change. This is really the parts and pieces that kind of create a natural flow together. And then the second part is around the elements of power, policies, and practices. This framework provides a holistic approach to understanding the dynamics of resource distribution, utilization, and community impact. So let me just dive in a little bit. So flow, absorb, and change. Flow refers to the continuous delivery of capital resources to community change agents, such as funding, donations, and other resources. These resources serve as a catalyst for community initiatives and enable agents to create positive change. The movement of flow is managed by various stakeholders, including philanthropy, government, intermediaries, and individuals. They all play critical roles in ensuring the efficient and equitable distribution of resources. The second part is absorb. So absorb really involves directing and deploying that flow of capital resources to community change agents through intermediaries or direct service providers. The holders of capital resources have the responsibility to monitor, protect, and enhance the flow, as well as to communicate back to funders on the use and impact of those resources. The holders must also develop mechanisms to listen to the community and develop narratives that reflect the health and evolution of community change. This feedback loop is vital in understanding the community's needs and aspirations. And then the third part of this is change. And change represents the transformative impact of the capital resources on community. As resources are being deployed, community change agents engage directly with the community to build strength, health, and aspirations, fostering thriving communities. Community change agents include nonprofits, direct service providers, grassroots organizations, individual organizers, leaders, and developers. They navigate and narrate the road to thriving by employing various actions and approaches based on the community's unique needs. So the interaction between flow, absorb, and change forms a cyclical relationship. The flow of capital resources leads to absorption, enabling community change agents to drive impactful change. As resources are deployed and community change occurs, the increased impact leads back to an amplified flow of resources. To understand then the dynamics of this, we also must consider the elements of power, policies, and practices. These elements play crucial roles in shaping and influencing the interactions within the framework. So power refers to the ability to influence decisions, actions, and outcomes within systemic institutions. It influences resource allocation, decision-making processes, and community engagement. Recognizing and addressing power dynamics is crucial to ensure equitable and inclusive collective impact initiatives. The second part is policies, and policies define the rules and guidelines that govern the distribution and utilization of capital resources. They outline eligibility, funding priorities, and reporting requirements. Policies shape the framework within which resources are distributed and ensuring transparency, accountability, and impact. And then there's practices. And practices encompass the strategies, processes, and methodologies employed in the flow, absorption, and utilization of capital. Effective practices facilitate the efficient and impactful distribution and absorption of resources. ensuring they reach community change agents and are utilized effectively. So let's open up the floor for discussion. I'd love to hear your thoughts and insights and experiences around this framework.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, Marcus, the elements you're talking about that's emerging for Rooted to Last is based on, our many conversations, but also the research that we are embarking on and really thinking about what are the right things to focus on if we want to move philanthropic and government institutions from where they are to really a more long-term approach in investing in communities of color. And so if the outcomes are various elements that you mentioned around flow, change, and absorption, because that's what we want to be different, then within the institutions themselves, what are the elements that we have to play with? And so the power, policy, and practice are the things that we want to kind of hone in and focus on to understand what does that look like internally now, and what can shift about them, right? So we talked about sort of the spectrum of, consciousness raising or consciousness building, that being the very kind of beginning growth mindset of within institutions. If we want people to grow, we have to invest in how we are building consciousness. But then if we move from that to action, what does that take? And then what does accountability look like? So I wanted to sort of introduce that spectrum too, because we believe that institutions can start from where they are, but we do think that if we want to achieve the three things that changes that you're talking about, we have to talk about what power, policy, and practice looks like at each of those stages. And what are the levers that both incentivize or decentivize people from doing certain things? And what are the potential actions that can be taken if there are roadblocks, right? Because we know there will be some. And sometimes the desire to change might be happening from a group of staff who don't have power or authorized power within a system. And so what is it that they could do right differently? And so I think those elements and how they interact will help us to get to the kinds of outcomes that really make flow, change, and absorption reflect the way that we believe systems have the potential to drive towards in a different way, right? And that we don't believe that the way of where systems are stuck right now are where they should continuously be, and also that the cycles of their practices and the ways in which they have tried things in the past can be looked at through that lens, so that they also have a sense of where are they on that spectrum, right? And where can they push themselves to be in a different place? And so we know that, for example, there's been a lot of investments in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that sometimes systems, both in foundations as well as government agencies, may have hired DEI staff personnel, right? And that they thought that was adequate to be able to build consciousness, but we see a lot of stuckness, and we haven't seen the level of investments follow, so that flow to community has not resulted. And the question is, what else could they be doing, right? How do they hold themselves to a different kind of intention, and where could they move to get to a different kind of outcome, so that communities are not left with sort of just accepting that we've tried something institutionally, but sorry, you're still not going to get the level of financial investments that we thought we could do, because we're just stuck on understanding certain things and things like that. So I would say, there's a lot to think through. This is still emerging, but we think that these are the right elements to focus on, and we would invite people to help us think about that, right? Are these, in fact, the right elements to focus on? Do they help you move from where you are and think more ambitiously, change your strategies, as well as hold yourselves accountable to your intentions and values?
I think just to maybe build off of what Bo is saying, we are excited about testing this kind of framework because we think that it is potentially encompassing. That if you think about how really the full kind of array of inputs, outputs to outcomes needs to happen, that this might encompass, as I like encompassing, it feels like it covers a lot of ground, but it also requires that we not just stop at this area of what you called consciousness building, Bo, this idea of like, okay, we understand, you hear, for example, more and more leaders talking about we are on, Dakota land, for example. How is that translating to action? How is that translating to change in understanding about the labor that our resources have been built on, about where our money comes from, and what that means in terms of our action, our behavior, the unlocking of resources, the ways that we think about our policies, practices, and how power plays out. How do we think differently? For example, if you're at a state agency, we've done, some of the consciousness raising, we've been doing work around DEI. Sometimes it's optional, sometimes it's mandatory. How is that making change in how we're allocating resources? Are we having the same expectations around reporting requirements for a community-based emerging community of color-led organization that is on the ground and understands what happens in community, but may not have the same kind of like infrastructure to be able to do the kind of intensive reporting? Or how are we thinking about data? What data do we want aggregated and available? What needs to be disaggregated in a different way? And I think that these questions fall under that framework. So I'm feeling a lot of excitement and enthusiasm around it. And now I want to get to this place where we can start talking about what this looks like. What are scenarios? And how might potential consequences and outcomes change when we ask questions differently?
That's right. I think that's a great point. And I think you guys have laid it out really nice. I think what I would want to add to this is like the dynamics of that process and that flow going from consciousness, action, and accountability. And one of the things that we've started to ponder is like, are we explaining just the paradigm that we currently are in, or are we starting to talk about what shifts could be possible if we understand that in order to go from consciousness to action, there has to be a relationship between systems and community. And if there's a relationship between systems and community, we're not just in the state of consciousness for the sake of being in consciousness, but it is to be there to move towards action and accountability. And one of our Wisdom Circle members, as we started to introduce this, talked about the idea of accountability having a reciprocal relationship with systems and community, so that it isn't just one side always giving to the other or vice versa, and that we're doing this together. The idea is that in order for us to move to accountability, we're in this together so that flow, absorption, and change happens. And ultimately, community sees its vision and it sees its aspirations play out, right? And so as we build out this framework, there will be visuals and everything that will represent, but it doesn't just start and end with flow, absorption, change, and policy, power, and practice, but it is around community infrastructure that's enduring, and then ultimately communities thriving on the other end of all of this. So I'm really excited about the possibility, but, questions still, for us that remain is, where do we go once people start to play with the parts and pieces of the framework? Bo, you mentioned things such as like, roadblocks and accelerators, and there's inside actors and institutions, and there's outside actors. And like, there's such a dynamic kind of 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional play here that if we can, understand it and help others understand it, the possibilities of unlocking some new solutions or amplification of solutions that already exist, I think it will be even more meaningful and powerful.
Mhm.
This framework it also will be accompanied by, for those that might get to a place where they can apply it and utilize it in an iterative way, it also will require folks to really ground themselves in a set of values. And I say that because I think about, sort of some of the real, like, really backlashy kind of policies we're seeing play out in states around the country, as it relates to banning of books, sort of the trans banning stuff, the, kind of attacks around all sorts of folks that are marginalized, and that backlash and what we're trying to do are in opposition to each other. And so we see this also with a set of kind of principles and values that also undergird the framework that we'll hope to see play out in the future.
Yeah, but I think, Tracy, to your point, what we're really also wanting for people to put a mirror to themselves and to really understand that we believe that no institution is stuck, and that we have enough resources to support every community to thrive. And that when communities thrive, they generate resources for themselves and for their communities and our country and all of those things, right? So this isn't about like creating and building on fear of what is going to come, because we want every community to be strong and we want leaders to achieve their full potential and all of those things. So if you come from a place where you are limited because you believe that if historically marginalized communities are given resources, they somehow are going to create things that then will not be to your benefit. I mean, I think that's like a values check about this, because that's not the worldview that we come from, right? We see that communities who are historically marginalized, when they don't achieve their full potential, we don't achieve our full potential, right? And so the approach in which we're building this framework and what we believe about institutions that belong to large systems who have resources that are meant to support communities, that this is not about just meeting their needs today. It's about making sure that we really facilitate people getting unstuck, and that they really believe in the human potential of every person, and that when people live the lives that they want, because I think at the end of the day, we all want the same thing in terms of being able to, be happy, being part of vibrant communities, being able to flourish and achieve our dreams, but also pursue our full potential. That's just all human beings, right? Now, systems create a lot of conditions that historically might put certain communities in marginalized positions. And that's what we're saying is, if we spend more energy trying to create conditions for people to be contained in a certain identity that we don't value, then I think that will be hard, right, for an institution to take this framework and mold it into a path forward, because they ultimately don't start at the same place we're starting at, which is a belief in, that every person is valued, and that every person, if given the right support and ask of their dreams, that they are able to achieve that in some way. And so I think having that kind of mentality will be a good starting point, but also recognizing that, organizations oftentimes do have those shared values, but through our lived practices, which means we have been conditioned in certain ways because we see certain communities as communities in need. We see certain communities as communities who we have not invested in, and we're worried if we invest in them, what will happen, right? So I do think that it is also a mirroring kind of framework for groups to kind of look at themselves and say, are we ready to pursue this, right? And what are we going to like? What is reflected back to us about, how we are living out our values. And so it is not a judgment about that, but I do think for us that we care that this is not about a continuation of further perpetuating systemic oppression for certain groups of people, that we have the opportunity to heal historic trauma, but also that this is in pursuit of that which we don't yet know, right? Mhm.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing both you say is this framework requires a shared value system, right?
Mhm.
This framework is for the willing, those that want to be in relationship with community. Recognizing that there are external forces that are always going to combat this, and it plays within power, policy, and practice, right?
Mhm.
And as long as those that are utilizing this framework in a way that engages in a shared value system in a shared value way, and does allow for that mirror effect of like, am I ready for this? Doesn't mean that I may never be ready, but am I ready now? And are the conditions right for me to begin this process with community? Because it is a journey. This is not a panacea for everything. This is a way to approach the work, to both look back in the past and say, well, what have we been contributing to that needs to change or could have changed or been better, that we can then possibly apply for future learning. And, as we've gone through and try to put different scenarios of our own lived experience or those of our wisdom circle of others, I think it's been easy to play with the pieces and understand the dynamics that took place. I think that the next phase of this is to be able to, separate the past and look towards the future of like what's possible and where do we begin and where do we have a shared beginning point, not just what we share together, but maybe what is shared differently in a way that allows us to come together. So there's some excitement for that, but recognizing that there's external forces, out there. There's individuals inside and outside actors that are utilizing their power, their individual power or their collective power to influence practices that are impacting people on a day-to-day basis in a real way, that lead to policies that are embedded that we have to, go against and try to, reverse and change in a more inclusive way. But as we talk about it, you could see how different parts and pieces start to, create, activity, or there's a natural rhythm already. So how do we influence and embed a new way of looking at that rhythm and change the rhythm of how this all works, so that we're changing the narrative. We're changing the narrative from that deficit mindset to asset framing. I think what we're attempting to do is here to say that there are aspirations and dreams at the other end of all of this. How do we back into it so that the outcomes can ultimately change through the inputs and outputs that you mentioned, Tracy?
Yep, absolutely.
So we're excited to keep doing the work, and I would just invite those who are interested and those who are curious about how we're doing the work and those who want to work with us on this to just stay tuned. You can follow us on our website at www.rootedtolast.org. And also just be in touch, and we'll have opportunities for conversations coming up and things. So we'll try to post those so that those who are interested can join us on the journey.